Oh, we're having fun so far. The kids are so beautiful to watch and listen to, and the stories were uplifting, and I'm encouraged by them. And I think it's very fitting that this morning I'm bringing to you to start today's message from 1 Kings 22. I'm bringing a bit of what I would call a children's story. It involves children, and I think if they were here, they could appreciate this story. But I think growing up in a church where children's stories were told every Sunday, I think that the ones who benefited most were the adults listening. And every children's story is just a story for adults masked with a different title. So this title of this story, which I've heard many times, and maybe you have as well, is called The Emperor's Seeds. And it's going to tie in with this story about Micaiah. Now, I find it's interesting we're talking about Micaiah today because I had no idea until this week that Micaiah, we have a Micaiah in our own church. And if you can believe it, this is Micaiah's birthday. And I had no idea that we're preaching on Micaiah. So happy birthday, Micaiah, as he's sitting there. Congratulations. But this story will tie in well. Let me read it to you. Once there was an emperor in the far east who was growing old and knew it was coming time to choose his successor. Instead of choosing one of his assistants or one of his own children, he decided to do something different. He called all the young people in the kingdom together one day, and he said, "It has come time for me to step down and choose the next emperor, and I decided that I would choose one of you." The kids were shocked, but the emperor continued, "I'm going to give each of you a seed today. One seed, but it's a very special seed. I want you to go home, and I want you to plant the seed, and I want you to water the seed, and I want you to come back here 1 year from today with what you have grown from this one seed. Then I will judge the plants that you bring to me, and I will choose one of you to be the next emperor of the kingdom." Well, there was one boy, his name was Ling. And Ling was there that day, and he, like the others, received a seed. And he went home, and he excitedly told his mother the whole story, and she helped him get a pot and some planting soil, and he planted the seed and watered it carefully. Every day he would water it, and he would watch it to see if it had grown. And after about 3 weeks, some of the other youths were beginning to talk about their seeds and the plants that were beginning to grow. But Ling kept going home and checking his seed, but nothing ever grew. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks passed, still nothing. And by now, others were talking about their plants, but Ling didn't have any plant, and he felt like a failure. 6 months went by, still nothing in Ling's pot. He just knew he had killed his seed. Everyone else had trees and tall plants, but he had nothing. And Ling didn't say anything to his friends. He just kept waiting for his seed to grow. A year finally went by, and all the youths of the kingdom brought their plants to the emperor for inspection. Ling told his mother that he wasn't going to take an empty pot, but she encouraged him to go and to take the pot and to be honest about what had happened. Ling felt sick to his stomach, but he knew his mother was right, and he took his empty pot to the palace. When Ling arrived, he was amazed at the variety of plants grown by all the other youths. They were beautiful, all shapes and sizes. Ling put his empty pot on the floor, and many of the other kids laughed at him. A few felt sorry for him and just said, "Hey, nice try." When the emperor arrived, he surveyed the room and greeted the young people. Ling just tried to hide in the back. "My, what great plants, trees, and flowers you have grown," said the emperor. "Today, one of you will be appointed the next emperor." Now, all of a sudden, the emperor spotted Ling at the back of the room with his empty pot, and he ordered his guards to bring him to the front. Ling was terrified. "The emperor knows I'm a failure. Maybe he will have me killed." When Ling got to the front, the emperor asked his name. "My name is Ling." All the other kids were laughing and making fun of him, and the emperor asked everyone to quiet down. He looked at Ling and then announced to the crowd, "Behold, your new emperor. His name is Ling." Ling couldn't believe it. Ling couldn't even grow his seed. How could he be the new emperor? Then the emperor said, "1 year ago today, I gave everyone here a seed. I told you to take the seed and plant it and water it and bring it back to me today. But I gave you all boiled seeds, which would not grow. All of you except Ling have brought me trees and plants and flowers, and when you found the seed would not grow, you substituted another seed for the one that I gave you. Ling was the only one with the courage and honesty to bring me a pot with my seed in it. Therefore, he is the one who will be the new emperor. Today, we're learning a story from 1 Kings chapter 22 about a man named Micaiah. And the theme of this morning is about the importance of truth-telling, even in the face of adversity. Today, we're going to learn about familiar characters like Ahab and Jehoshaphat, and of course, Micaiah. We want to read these scriptures together and go through them, and I hope that I'll be able to lead you through this in a way that you'll see that in spite of the difficult result for Micaiah, for telling the truth telling is always most important. Starting in the first verse of chapter 22, and this story, if you're not familiar, is also found in 2 Chronicles chapter 18, but they're almost identical. Starting in verse 1, it says, "For 3 years there was no war between Aram and Israel." Now, Aram at that time was another name for Syria. Israel was different than Judah. If you'll recall, there were two different locations where kings were reigning because of division in the people of Israel. There was now the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, where Jerusalem and the holy worship center was. There was a king in the north, in Israel, and his name was Ahab, and in the south, the king in Judah at the time was Jehoshaphat. So with that in mind, rereading verse 1, "For 3 years there was no war between Aram and Israel, but in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went down to see the king of Israel." Now, although geographically Israel is to the north, there was a feeling here that there is not only geographical downswinging in terms of the travel, but there's also this humility and need of assistance. Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went down to see the king of Israel, and the king of Israel, who was Ahab, said to his officials, "Don't you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us, and yet we are doing nothing to retake it from the king of Aram?" So to the east, there was this land known as Syria or Aram, and there was a battle going on between Israel, Judah, and this foreign nation. And in the border between those two lands, there was this pivotal space and city called Ramoth Gilead. And the King Ahab specifically, wanted that place back in his possession. "Don't you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us, and yet we are doing nothing to retake it from the king of Aram or Syria?" So he asked Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to fight against Ramoth Gilead?" Now, you have to understand at this point in the story, Ahab was an evil king. There was no good in this man. In fact, scriptures declare him to be probably the most evil and wicked king that Israel had ever known. He was married to an evil wife named Jezebel, and many of you have heard stories about Jezebel and her antics, or heard about the spirit of Jezebel, which is not a good spirit. But he asks Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to fight?" And Jehoshaphat quickly replies, it's like no time passes. And he quickly replies to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." If you weren't aware, to make some peace and amendments between those two nations, which is often the case, you'll take a relative of one nation and marry them to a relative of the other nation so that there can be a bond between those two nations. And so the son of Jehoshaphat is now married to the daughter of Ahab so that there be some connection. And so when he says these words, "I am as you are, your people are my people are your people, my horses are your horses," there's already been this pact made. Perhaps wrongly. Because Jehoshaphat, to the other extreme, is known as one of the most loyal kings to the one true God. But now there's an allegiance. There's this tie, not only connection through relationship, through government, but through family. But he does say in the next phrase, but Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, first though, let's seek the counsel of the Lord. And a small aside here is the word Lord is capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, which in that passage is describing the personal name of Yahweh, the one true God, Jehoshaphat's God. So the king of Israel brought together the prophets. This is not something that Ahab actually had much interest in, but he said, well, your family, and I need your help. And so if this is the smallest thing that I can do to make this bond secure, then I'm going to do it because I can't go on and battle for Ramoth Gilead without you. So he comes together and brings together the prophets, about 400 men. And he asks them, Ahab is asking these men who were personally hired by him, prophets, shall I go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? And to a man they all said, go, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. Now, the word Lord in that response is not capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. It's a general term for a king or a master. They weren't referring to the one true God. But Jehoshaphat asked, and perhaps quite wisely, is there no longer a prophet of the capitalized Lord here whom we can inquire of? The king of Israel answered Jehoshaphat, oh, there is still one. One. 400 prophets who would say whatever they wanted to the king because they wanted to tickle his ears, but there is one, and he's begrudgingly even identifying this one for this very reason. There is still one prophet through whom we can inquire of the capitalized Lord, but I hate him. And why do I hate him? Because he never prophesies anything good about me, but always bad. He never says what I want to hear. And his name is Micaiah, the son of Imlah. The king should not say such a thing, Jehoshaphat replied. So the king of Israel called one of his officials and said, okay, bring Micaiah, son of Imlah, at once. I need his help, Jehoshaphat's help. So dressed in their royal robes, this is how pompous they were, and they wanted to show their authority in the place where they were. This was not uncommon. They would have portable thrones. They would have clothes that would declare their royalty and power in the world. So dressed in their royal robes, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, were sitting on the thrones at the threshing floor by the entrance to the gate of Samaria, and with all the prophets prophesying before them. Now, one of those prophets, his name was Zedekiah. And Zedekiah was son of Kenana, and he had made these iron horns, which goes back to like an Old Testament prophetic word where, the horns would represent the power and authority that one nation might have over another. And so with these horns that he had made out of iron, he declared, this is what the Lord said, with these you will gore the Arameans or the Syrians until they are destroyed. And all the other prophets were prophesying the same thing. Wow, what a shock. They all liked their position. They all liked their income. They all liked not being afraid of the king. They all knew that Ahab could do anything, and if it wasn't for him, it would be his wife, Jezebel, who was still alive, who would then take some control and affect their lives. We know this because of the story of earlier prophets. Elijah, specifically, who spoke a word of the Lord. Do you remember the story of Elijah where he spoke to 450 prophets of Baal? And went up against them 450 to 1. This is sounding quite familiar. And he spoke against the authority, and yet God blessed him, brought fire on his altar, proving his worth to the people. But Jezebel came and brought fear into Elijah's life. She was evil. She would do anything she could to stand against the advance of the name of the Lord and his authority. So all the other prophets were prophesying the same thing. Attack Ramoth Gilead and be victorious, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. The messenger who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, now, It was like he was giving him a little bit of forewarning that 400 prophets have already been agreeing to go with this story that you are going to be able to go into this battle and win. Look, this messenger says to Micaiah, the other prophets without exception are predicting success for the king. Let your word favorably agree with theirs. But this is the key verse, and I think a takeaway for all of us. If we can go with one verse in this entire chapter, it says, but Micaiah said in response, as surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what the Lord tells me. As surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what the Lord tells me. Micaiah was a prophet. And Micaiah would not be worth his salt if he wasn't going to be a prophet who spoke the word of the Lord. And he knew what was going on. He could sense this. And when he arrives in verse 15, the king asked him, Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead or not? I don't know what he was expecting Micaiah to say, but he was inviting him to speak and respond. And so you have to think about this in the way that Micaiah was coming in. And I don't know how appropriate it was, but he used a bit of sarcasm here. And he says, oh, attack and be victorious. I'm trying to put his voice in this passage. Oh, yeah, attack, go ahead. Be victorious. Be victorious, for the Lord will give it into your hand. Now the king, knowing this tone, said, how many times must I swear to you to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? How ironic. So Micaiah said, no, okay, thanks. I will tell you the truth. And the truth is this. I saw all of Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd, and the Lord said, these people have no master. Let each one of them go home in peace. He was, in fact, in one short sentence, declaring that Aram would defeat Ahab. That Ahab would come to his demise. That Syria would overtake him, his life would be given up, and that people would now have no leader. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, didn't I tell you that he never prophesies anything good about me, but only bad? At this point, you'd think that Jehoshaphat would be having his ears perked. Now, Ahab, you can expect it. You would expect him never to be listening at this point because he already came in with a predetermined desire that he wanted to hear his own plan come to fruition. He was not interested in hearing what God had to say whatsoever. But Jehoshaphat, on the other hand, he should know better. He should know at this point that Micaiah was coming in as a true prophet and speaking the truth of the Lord. He always had, and he was continuing to do so now. And why it should be even more motivating is that Micaiah was coming, perhaps even from prison, to this place and knowing that his life could be on the line. He knew he was going up against the crowd. Micaiah continues with this very odd vision. Therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne. Now remember, when you hear things like this and this vision that you're going to hear, this isn't literal. But it does point to what will take place and what is taking place. So just with that in mind, listen to these words. I saw the Lord sitting on the throne with all the multitudes of heaven, standing around him on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there? One suggested this, one suggested that. Finally, in verse 21, a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him. Now, this is an evil spirit that's standing before the Lord in this vision. And this is going to show the authority of the Lord to do whatever it takes to declare and fulfill his promise. By what means, the Lord asked, I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all of his prophets, he said, which is exactly what was happening. You will succeed in enticing him, said the Lord. Go and do it. So now the Lord has put a deceiving spirit into the mouths of all these prophets of yours. The Lord has decreed disaster for you. He's giving him one last chance to run, to say, no, everything that you've heard, although 400 people are saying it, doesn't mean that the majority is always right. In fact, oftentimes, majority is often wrong. How often have you followed someone just because the majority was doing it? And what was the outcome of that? So Zedekiah, the one with the horns, by the way, he comes up and he slaps Micaiah in the face. This would be a little different than one of you, and please don't, walking up out of your seat down the aisle and slapping me in the face and saying these words, which way did the Spirit from the Lord go when he went from me to speak to you? As if to say, what authority do you have? Why are you speaking against me? Who do you think you are? It's no different than the ridicule that we heard in the story about the seeds. Micaiah replied, you will find out one day when you go to hide in an inner room, which is basically a foreshadowing and forthtelling of something that would happen to Zedekiah later on that would lead to his demise. The king of Israel then ordered, take Micaiah and send him back to Amon, the ruler of the city, and to Joash, the king's son, and say, this is what the Lord said. Put this fellow in prison, give him nothing but bread and water until I return safely. And Micaiah declared, if you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me. Do you see what he's saying here? He's saying, if my words don't come true, I wasn't worth being a prophet before you anyway. If you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me. Then he added, mark my words, all you people. In this story, we see that we have a story about Ahab, who had no interest in seeking the Lord whatsoever. He had no fear of the Lord. In fact, he was more interested in his own power and his own authority than ever fearing the Lord. But it says in Psalm 111, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and all who follow the precepts that he offers have good understanding. Ahab was doing nothing other than going by his own understanding. All the words that he was receiving are basically words that he had planted into his own prophets because they were so fearful of what would happen if they didn't speak the truth. In Isaiah 11, we hear about this foreshadowing of Jesus coming to earth as the powerful authority. And it says the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding and counsel and power and knowledge and fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or hears with his ears. He will just speak with truth from what God speaks to his heart. It means when we fear the Lord that we honor and respect God in a righteous and honoring way, that we live in awe of his power and we obey his word no matter what. Because the fear of the Lord brings wisdom and counsel and power, and it results in confidence, not cowardly behavior that we're going to see in Ahab as he enters into battle. The story goes on and tells the story of Ahab and Jehoshaphat moving forward into battle. And before the battle even begins, Ahab says to Jehoshaphat, oh, by the way, I have a great idea. Why don't we go into battle, and I'm going to dress down, I'm going to take off all my royal robes, and why don't you wear royal robes? Why do you think he was doing that? Because he was trying to draw the attention away from himself. He said, I don't want to be the one that's killed here. Why don't you take the fall? And for some reason, Jehoshaphat continues to fall. It's not that he didn't start well. It's not that all of you haven't started well. It's that somewhere along the way we've aligned with someone from the opposition, the liar, Satan himself, and we've said, we know what, maybe there's something that we can share together. And he calls for an alignment with you and I in our lives, and he draws us into battle, even into places that we should never be. And he invites us, oh, why don't you put on the royal robes? Why don't you be the first one to go into battle? And Ahab is starting to cower. I don't know if he understood at that point that you just can't escape God's judgment. When you listen to yes men, it goes back to the story where we had King Solomon, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a new leader in the place. And his own sons were involved in the story. And then Rehoboam has the opportunity to be one of the great kings that follow in Solomon's footsteps. And Rehoboam, instead of listening to wise counsel, he listens to his childhood friends, and they give him poor counsel. And it ends up being the division into the northern and southern kingdoms. It's not like Ahab didn't have previous knowledge. It's not like Jehoshaphat didn't have previous knowledge. It's that they just weren't submitting themselves in the fear of the Lord. But then we have Jehoshaphat, of course, and we see that Jehoshaphat was like a man in the story who, at the height of the chaos, he seeks out the Lord. In the midst of that battle that goes on, here it is that he's in his royal robes, and he's the one that's going out with the chariots, and they see him, and they're coming for him. And he cries out to the Lord in the moment of desperation. Finally understands that I need you. I've forgotten about you, but here in the crisis I'm in, I'm calling out to you. And God spares his life. Sometimes in the chaos we seek the Lord, but if we just seek him in the quiet spaces, the truthful spaces, we invite him to be the voice that leads us instead of the worldly voices that would want to lead us toward different harmful directions. He sought the Lord instead of relying on his own wisdom at that moment, finally, and the Lord spared him. You know, in 1 John chapter 4, it says these words, which should be an encouragement to all of us to think about how we live. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Dear friends, don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." Moving to verse 4, it says, "You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. And therefore speak from the viewpoint of the world, and the world listens to them, but we are from God. And whoever listens to God, whoever knows God listens to us, but whoever is not from God does not listen to us. This is how we recognize the spirit of truth and the spirit of falsehood." There's this disparity and great chasm between the spirit of truth and the spirit of falsehood. But even in this heightened moment of war, we can see that God will still answer us as we cry out to him in desperation, saying, I need you, and I need to hear your truth once again. But it leads us to Micaiah. And so Micaiah is standing there, and he's opposing Ahab. He has opposing views. He knows that he's in trouble. When he speaks these with boldness, he comes with courage. He's not worried about his own personal safety at this moment, because his integrity is far greater in importance than his own safety. Ahab, you listen to Psalm 1, it tells us we must honor and respect God and be in awe of his power. In 1 Corinthians 15, it says, don't be misled. Bad company corrupts good behavior. But now, when we look at the story of Micaiah, it says that we are to hear God speak to us when he says to us, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. We talked yesterday at our men's meeting, which went incredibly well. And we heard in one of the sessions about the idea of being abiding in him. And out of the overflow of that abiding, we will do what is right. And when we abide with him, his truth just comes to our hearts. When we read his word, his truth comes to our hearts. And we overflow with truth. We can't do anything but. That's what Micaiah did. Micaiah speaks the word of the Lord with courage. He won't waver because of that divine relationship and his knowledge of God's divine providence. In that scene, in the war scene, we actually learn that Jehoshaphat is saved, but ironically, it's this random arrow that's flung into the air by the opposition that lands in one of the separations in Ahab's armor. And for the rest of the day, he bleeds out in the chariot and he dies. No one would have expected that. They would have expected Jehoshaphat, if anyone, to be the one that goes first. And yet, in all of this, if we listen to the majority, we would think that none of this would ever happen and they would have just been completely victorious. But Micaiah spoke to the capitalized L-O-R-D. The application for us is that in our lives, we need to seek truth tellers in our lives. We need to reject the temptation to surround ourselves with those who will just simply agree with us. And if we understand as believers, we know that our truth can come from God, and he will never deceive us. He will always lead us into the paths of righteousness, into the paths of what aren't always the safest places in terms of what the world would offer to us, but they are the safest places. Even in jail, When Micaiah goes to jail, that's the safest place that he can be because he's in the center of God's will. We need to seek out those truth tellers. We need to exercise discernment when it comes to understanding what is true and what is not. We need to fear God and trust him at all times, understanding his ultimate plan will prevail. And we need to speak truth courageously, knowing that our integrity and our faithfulness, our clear conscience and our peace, the affirmation that we will receive from God when we understand, just as Micaiah was a true prophet, that we can be true prophets, underscoring the certainty of God's word when we speak truth into the world that may not want to hear what we have to offer. Scripture says in Ephesians 4:3, it says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Psalm 133:1 says, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. But our unity doesn't come from unifying ourselves with a lie. It doesn't come from unifying ourselves with the enemy or the opposition, one who stands directly in conflict with the capitalized Lord, Yahweh, the God who sees and knows and loves. Amos 3:3 says, can two walk together unless they are agreed? Who are you walking with? Who are you in unity with? Who are you keeping step with? And are you both keeping in step with the Spirit when you make these important decisions in your life? Students, at this time in your life when you're deciding where is God calling me, this is the most important time of your life to be able to unify yourselves with others who will pray with you, walk with you, point with you what God has for you, and to say what he wants is more important than what I want. His fame is more important than my fame. So 2 Corinthians 6, verses 14 to 16 reminds us that we are to be warned that believers are not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers. You've heard this. We think, oh, Jesus would never want unrest. I just want everything to be peaceful. Are you a person who just loves peace? I love peace, trust me. And yet Jesus, if you read these scriptures, it's hard to read sometimes in Matthew 10 when it said Jesus didn't come to bring peace. Jesus is completely offensive. The gospel is completely offensive, and yet it's true to the core. And it brings ultimate peace. He is the Prince of Peace. But he will stand against what is a lie. In Ecclesiastes 7, verse 5, it says, it's better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. In Proverbs 27, it says, open rebuke is better than hidden love. The wounds of a sincere friend are trustworthy, unlike the deceitful kisses of an enemy. May we be reminded this morning that telling the truth offers benefits such as freedom from deception, strengthened relationships, a closer walk with God. Truth sets believers free. Micaiah was free in the midst of being in jail. And yet who were imprisoned? Ahab and Jehoshaphat, those prophets and others. Truth sets believers free from the shame of hiding and fear. It builds trust with others. It helps us to know God better and know him because he is the truth and is truth. He is truth itself. So being truthful in every way as we align with him is so key and so important because we want to reflect his character. We are ambassadors for Christ. Micaiah that day was an ambassador for God himself. No lies, no deception, no manipulation, no confusion. And we know what God thinks about lying. It's an abomination to him. And so I think today, as we think about this story of Micaiah, I hope that you will be encouraged to think about who it is that we're aligning ourselves with. What voices are we allowing to speak to us? What truth are we searching for, and where will we find it? I want to tell you that he is truth. And you will never falter or go wrong or away from his plan when you seek him and his truth. So what important decisions are you looking to make even now? What's the most important decision you're making right now? Have you invited the most trusted word into your life? Have you invited people who are around you? Have you weighed whether they are going to speak truth to you? I don't know if you've ever seen a magic 8 ball. But what I would encourage you is not live your life like you're making decisions by turning over the magic 8-ball. If you didn't know, the magic 8-ball that you can purchase at the store, well, when you turn it over, you ask it a question, you turn it over, and you look for a response. And guess what happens? If you didn't know, 75% of the time, it's going to give you an answer that's favorable for what you want. Every once in a while, it says no. But I can tell you that that would not be a high seller if 75% of the time it said no to you. It's successful because it says yes most of the time. So the question is, where are you seeking the truth? And are you, more importantly, telling the truth? Micaiah told the truth. And we're still benefiting from that truth today. God, will you allow us to be truth tellers? Would you show us the importance of speaking truth, even when it seems like, oh, well, maybe I can just avoid conflict? I'm reminded yesterday from our men's meeting to know when to speak. Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it true? And in this case, as much as other people may have opposed it, what Micaiah shared was the most kind, necessary, and true word that he could offer. May we follow his steps and do the same. Thank you that you are our truth. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to invite the team to come back. I'm already going to step out of your way.